So what I was going to do was, there's quite a lot of you, if it's possible for you to mute, see most of you have, maybe turn off your cameras might improve your experience for the time being. I was just going to talk my way through these slides and not take questions while I'm doing that. And then after I finish that, the last slide will be any questions, and I'll then open the floor. And if questions relate to any of the slides, I can click backwards and forwards and focus on the slide you had a question about, hopefully, and perhaps we can delve into that a bit deeper. Before I start doing my slideshow on this, just some background. Some of you will probably be quite well informed about this. Others may be hearing about it for the first time. There are reasons for that. There are also reasons that at the moment there's nothing up on the website about this. Part of the reason for that is there have been some quite complex and sometimes sensitive negotiations with a large range of partners, because there are many working parts to this concept. And that's included our partners on the secular side. It's included, obviously, the insurance companies. It's included sister bodies like the Churches Conservation Trust, the National Churches Trust. And it has included other departments within the national church institutions. And last but not least, a number of dioceses. And we've been working quite closely with a number of dioceses on developing this idea over the last few years, trying to build up a head of steam with it, see if it would actually work in its legal and commercial aspects. Particularly grateful to the Diocese of Norwich, who had some of the ideas that will come out in this originally in their Diocesan Churches Trust, though this is a bit different. Also grateful to the Diocese of Edinburgh and Ipswich, and James Halsall in particular, who ran a pilot on this just before COVID interrupted us, and that managed to put a bit of flesh on the bones of this concept, looking at a couple of deaneries in that diocese. To the Diocese of Worcester, who's founded the first church buildings management partnership that exists at the moment. It's actually had its charitable incorporated organisation recognised by the Charity Commission, and a number of other dioceses who I've talked to about this. At the end of 2021, we engaged with all the diocesan secretaries about a number of initiatives, this being one, and asked them for expressions of interest. And this, of the number of projects that we put forward, whether they were interested, this was the one that most of them were interested in. So we had 35 yes, we're interested from diocesan secretaries, which is quite a thing actually, to get that amount of interest. Armed with that information at the start of the year, we've built this into a larger package, which is called Buildings for Mission, which you'll be hearing more about in the coming days. That's an 11 million package of funding from the church commissioners for a number of initiatives around church buildings. And this is part of that package. So we now have what many of the dioceses I've talked to asked for, which is some funding and support for the rollout of this package if it finds favour. So I think that's probably enough of an introduction. So this is part of a larger project. As I say, you'll hear more about it shortly, involving asking for applications for support officer roles and minor repairs funding and a number of other things. Also digital enhancement of things like the online faculty system and church heritage record and the faculty management systems. There's a lot in there that I won't talk about today, but this is part of a bigger project. But I'd just like to focus on this today. This is a soft to medium launch, I would say. Partly because we now have the funding since last week. The funding was set up by the Archbishop's Council and agreed, which is great. And we had our first project board management meeting of the Buildings for Mission project. So that's the reason for the timing. We're just about to go from soft medium launch to hard launch with this. You will hear more about it. So this is just so that when we start talking about this, in a more structured way, you'll know what we mean, and there will be a website that will start to flesh all this out for you a bit more. This is triennium funding, so it only actually officially starts on January the 1st. So I'll get into my slides. That was quite a long preamble. Church Buildings Management Partnerships, CBMPs. It's quite a long-winded phrase. I don't expect everybody to necessarily use that going forward, but that's what I'm using to describe this concept, which is fairly flexible. So why, what are they, and what are they good for? If you've never heard about them before, I hope this will give you the information you need. So the reason for establishing or investigating this concept is what many of us see, particularly in the wake of COVID. Many parishes struggle to do these things. So we've got this rather unsatisfactory struggling churches policy approach. How do we help struggling churches? Because many of them, as we know, struggle to maintain their buildings. They struggle to find competitive insurance deals. They will generally take something off the shelf, which can lead to quite high premiums. They struggle to find enough volunteers for these and other basic tasks. And they struggle to find time or ways to reach out to their community. And you will often hear, you know, we don't have the time to do mission. We don't have the time to reach out to the community because the building takes so much of our time. So this concept is aimed, and the rest of the building submission package is aimed squarely at those issues. So what that means in reality, those factors, is that many churches are understaffed. We all know this. They struggle to form a PCC. They perhaps struggle to have 2 church wardens. They simply haven't got the people available locally who can do all the things that all the legislation expects them to do. And those faithful few therefore feel very overstressed on many occasions. Of course, this isn't the case everywhere, but it is the case with many churches, particularly in rural areas and suburban areas. This means that many of them are under-maintained. They may not have any kind of regular arrangement for regular maintenance. We know that a number of dioceses, because we've been following it very closely, have tried to set up various forms of maintenance schemes to try and address that. And there are a number of reasons why those generally don't work. It's because of lack of guaranteed work for the contractors. People do it for 2 or 3 years and then decide it's fine, don't do it anymore to save money. All those reasons mean that many of our churches are not very well maintained, or not as well maintained as they could be. And they're arguably, it's case it will be different, overinsured. So they will often have multi-million-pound cover on the basis of what might be an undesirable like-for-like or facsimile replacement. So in other words, just putting the roof back on the way it was, getting as much back to what you had before, perhaps with some modern facilities. And that is covering the vanishingly rare event of total destruction. We keep a database of cases of total destruction. It's less than 1 a year. Over the last 20 years, of course, if you're in a diocese where that happens, it will be keenly felt, and it's a big blow to the community when that does happen. But we are arguing for people to take a nuanced approach when total destruction happens as to what they do in the aftermath of that, and not to rush to any decisions about perhaps putting the thing back, which is a natural reaction, to put the thing back the way it was before, or as near as you can. There might be better ways of spending that money, and perhaps one doesn't need necessarily that much money to achieve what one needs in that particular place. And that will be case specific. So what do church buildings management partnerships aim to do to solve some of those problems, or to help with some of those problems? So the idea is to provide a safety net through doing certain things. So there's sort of 2 twinned basic things that we're suggesting are arranging basic regular maintenance. And that has the effect of meaning, obviously, that the churches are regularly maintained to a basic standard. It can be a better standard, but that's a decision that can be made in each individual case. But the basic model is basic regular maintenance. And that provides the suppliers with standard contracts they can work to. And it gives them business security, because they will get a critical mass of buildings that they know they have once this is built up year for year. That makes it more cost effective for them and interesting for them to keep providing that service. And of course, critical mass keeps costs down, because if a particular provider is only doing 1 or 2 churches, they're going to have quite high overheads in relation to the work they're doing. So if you can have that at scale, it will be advantageous, and such contractors could, of course, work across diocesan boundaries. Booking insurance is twinned with that, but these two things, we've heard from some dioceses, they want to do one or the other or both. So at the moment, the standard model, which can be varied, is to have a higher excess, a lower premium with a standard of 25% insurance. For example, if a church is insured for £10 million, that would pay out £2.5 million. If the very worst happened, that would be enough money to cover most things that happen beyond total destruction. That can lead to some considerable reductions in the insurance premium, the twinning of higher excess and lower premiums, 25% cover. And that one of the main things here, though, is not just saving money to make space for services such as maintenance within the contract with the CBMP. Most crucially, it saves money, saves time and stress. Both those things would save time and stress for parishes who know that these things are just being done and they don't have to worry about it. And there could be an option to offer other services. Some dioceses have said if there's a package like this that's being provided to parishes, what about quinquennial inspections? What about electrics and fire safety, things like that? All these things are possible because the simple model of an overarching body or trust affecting through a lease, being able to manage these things on behalf of parishes can be applied to more or less anything if the PCC agrees to it. So there are all those options, from a very basic offer to perhaps, as time goes on, an offer that with more services attached to it, which could in fact include consultancy and things like that in certain cases. So the idea is that these things that are agreed with the parish that the CBMP would take over would be based on one simple fee. So the parish pays one fee and gets the services that have been agreed. Clearly that will vary from diocese to diocese, church to church, and would need to be negotiated. But the amount that they pay may be based on their present insurance premium, which may be quite high, and it might be possible to get that down, making space for the other services to be provided. So there are a lot of models going around, trust models. The idea of trusts is very popular, that people can be encouraged to take on looking after buildings. That can be very good. This is a sort of macro version of that, if you like, at diocesan or regional level. Why would this have an advantage over other models? As I said, we've won some funding for this, some central funding. So we will have 2 specialist officers based in Church House within the parish buying section of the NCIs. And those 2 specialist officers will be expert in maintenance contracts, working to a standard contract which they can offer you, and in dealing with the insurance companies. So giving that professional advice, not necessarily telling you which insurer to go with, but telling you what you would need to have in your insurance package, because this area is complex. There is public liability insurance, there is buildings insurance, there are various aspects to that. It is complex, it's beyond me, which is why we're going to get somebody who really knows what they're talking about to negotiate between nascent church buildings management partnerships and parishes and the insurance companies. What it does, which is a bit different than some other models, is it leaves the PCC and the incumbent in charge of the building. So it doesn't take over the building. It's not aggressive in any way. It frees them from some of these tiresome tasks. They don't have to worry about these things. They're organized for them. And that should give them more headspace, more time to explore mission potential and community outreach. So if the CBMP is in place, using a lease of a small part of the church to achieve the insurable interest, then the PCC is free to explore licenses or leases with, say, community groups or cultural groups or anybody, or commercial groups, to use parts of the church, and they would have the assurance that the building is being around them, that they are leasing or licensing part of, is being well looked after and is insured. So this is not an aggressive takeover. The Church Buildings Management Partnership does not gain control over the building or what happens in it. This is a mechanism in order to allow them to do agreed things on the PCC's behalf. Of interest to some dioceses, I know, is that when this, say, the maintenance and insurance is being looked after for a church, perhaps other things too, if the church has a period of stress, which might be a vacancy, a church warden has become ill or died, and there's really no people able to carry on the normal functions, the CBMP by agreement could carry a church through those difficult periods using its critical mass to manage the building at that point, and perhaps be able to look at some wider use seeking opportunities. So how do you set one up? What is a Church Buildings Management Partnership legally? How do you go about setting up such a thing if you're interested? So the basics is to establish what's known as a charitable incorporated organization, which is a relatively new form of charity formed by the government through the Charity Commission in the last few years. It's very simple and stripped down. And the advantage that it has is that individual trustees do not carry any liability. But the CIO would need its own liability insurance. So what we've developed would be a template, or many of you will have seen it, which follows the successful Diocese of Worcester Trust template. So the Diocese of Worcester has set up, has been successful in setting up such a CIO. So one already exists. And if one wishes to replicate that, one can. And it means that really all you have to do if you're going to follow that standard model is fill in the names of your diocese, your trustees, and the parishes involved on the dotted lines. And there's really no work to do there. If you want to do it a bit differently, obviously it'd be a bit more work, but we will have those two officers who could help you with that. And there's some money. So we have got a £10,000 per diocese starter grant from the Buildings for Mission Fund. We are encouraging dioceses who are thinking about this to think of partnering with neighbouring dioceses to have one CIO, because that's a possible thing to do. It would save you administration. It would mean perhaps you didn't need to put quite so many people on a trustees board, because you could share those out. And it would maximize the grants. So if 3 dioceses or 4 dioceses decided to go together to form one of these things, again, critical mass, they would get a £40,000 starter grant, which would be enough to employ somebody perhaps, or to cover some of the paperclips costs that inevitably occur. Setting up a CIO doesn't cost anything, but obviously it costs some officer time to do that. So there always are incidental costs. And then once that's been set up, and there's nothing to stop any of you starting on this road at any point, as I say, the Diocese of Worcester is down that road. It takes usually about 45 days for the Charity Commission to consider your application, but they will get used to seeing these if many dioceses make applications to be registered. So we have our 2 building submission specialists based in Parish Buying, as I said, who can talk you through standardized legal and contractual arrangements that once they're in post, they will be developing on your behalf if you wish to go this way. So there's a good deal there of support for anyone wanting to go this way, and a lot of the technical questions that I perhaps won't be able to answer, they will, although I'll try my best in a minute, because they will be specialists in those areas of procurement, specifically in the areas of maintenance and insurance. So that's the support package we've put in place. That's basically what these things do. I would encourage you to look into this. It's all on a voluntary basis. Nobody has to set up a Church Buildings Management Partnership, and no parish, no church is required to join it. It's all completely voluntary. And it may well be that these things take different shape in different parts of the country, and we'd be quite fine with that. We think we can take a fairly open approach to what these things look like. But basically, if you're setting up a CIO that uses a lease mechanism in order to be able to book things on behalf of parishes that would sound very much like a CBMP to us, or enough like a CBMP to allow the funding and advice to flow. And we can set out some criteria for that later as we go more public with this. So that's a heads up in the first place. There should be, we're going to have a sort of low-key internal press release on the whole building submission package that this is part of in the coming days. You will also see some information coming out about the Twinned Net Zero project. So we are working quite closely together with the Net Zero project, which you may know has got 190 million of funding to spend over the next 9 years, next 3 triennia. We have 11 million for the next 3 years, which this is part of. So you'll see something coming out about that, and then this will start to take more shape as the weeks go by. As I say, the project officially starts on January the 1st. So, I'll close that. Stop sharing. Where's the stop sharing button? Go back there. My glasses on to read the screen properly. Just bear with me a moment. Get rid of that. All right. So if you could all switch your cameras on, and anyone who wants to speak, don't forget to unmute yourself. I'd be very happy to take any questions that you might happen to have on that. I know that was a very solid and dense package of information. And perhaps if you could use your yellow hands. So Graham Davis is straight out of the blocks here. David.
Thanks, Joe, for that. Can I just talk or ask you to expand on the insurance arrangements and how you see them? Do you think the savings will come from the block contract predominantly, or from the change in the level of cover that is being seen? So if all our churches said, actually, we want to maintain our level of cover, what would you envisage the reduction being from achieving a block contract?
Yeah, the block contract does create some savings, but they're not huge. They're somewhere in the region of sort of 5 to 10%. The bigger savings do come with the lower premiums. So if you were to take the model where the diocese wanted to put little or no money into it and wanted to balance the books by saying, okay, say your insurance premium at the moment is £5,000, we can get that down through block booking, maybe to 4,500, 4,800. That doesn't leave you much money for your maintenance, to fit your maintenance scheme in. If they all said, no, we want to keep 100% insurance. If there's a mix, obviously the figures then get mixed. And you as a CBMP, whoever the trustees are, would in every case have to consider whether they could admit a church into the CBMP if it wanted 100% insurance, and what you would charge them for that. So in a perfect world where they go to 25% cover, so let's say a church is insured for £10 million. If the worst happened, they would still get 2.5 million under the 25% insurance, and up to 2.5 million for lesser damage, thefts, etc., would be paid. There is a special case for lead roofs, which I expect to be asked about. That's more or less the way that the deal works. So the concept was originally aimed at festival churches. It was aimed at churches that would be out in a rural location, but many people have said to me, actually, this concept could work for a church in any location, in any situation. And if a church, say in a town, wanted to be insured for 100 or 75%, you would have to go back to them and said, we can provide you with these services, but it will cost you a bit more. So it might not work that they would get all the services within whatever it is they're paying for insurance at the moment. That's a decision. But say you were in a very rural diocese and you had a large number of churches that were in this position and were happy, just wanted the CBMP to take on those responsibilities for it and was happy to take 25%, you could probably get about 20% savings on that. And that would probably allow you to have a maintenance package as part of that deal. So it really depends on how much each of you if you're interested in this, want to put into it, and with what you're prepared to do to get that deal up and running, and how much support you want to give your churches in that. Is that an answer?
It is. Can I come back with a follow-up then? Just on the, if we were to achieve 5 to 10% across 600 churches, and in other words, put all of our churches in, would there be any reason why we couldn't do that as a sort of a basic level of entry into the CBMP, and then offer a further service if they wanted to reduce the level of their percentage of cover down to 25% or somewhere lower than it is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, anything is possible within this. I mean, it's a quite well-worn model to use a lease mechanism to achieve an insurable interest. So basically all you're doing is, as I say, if anyone wants to take on this model, they can cut it any way they want. You could do all of those things. We would have if you have formed a CBMP with the CIO mechanism and a lease, you can then use that to offer whatever you like, and you will still get the support from our officers on the legal side of that. If you just wanted to do it for insurance, you would get advice from our insurance officer who would help you with your negotiations with the insurer. Obviously, both main insurers know about it. They know what we're doing and they're working on packages. So to some extent, you can play them off against each other to get the best deal. So our officers would help you with that. So again, the basic premise is this lease mechanism from an overarching body to help parishes with these things. You don't have to have all of the package. Some dioceses are only interested in maintenance, some in insurance, and some are interested in, as you've said, a step-by-step approach.
Thank you.
Is that enough for time being?
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. So on my screen, I think the hand that's been up longest is, everyone's moving around on my screen, which is very difficult. Kath, could you speak up? Kate Andrew, could you speak up?
Yeah. Hi, Joe. Right.
Hello, Kate.
So have you got your 2 post holders in post already, or are you in the process of recruiting them?
No, we're in the process of recruiting them. Grace is on this call. Grace is our head of parish buying, and she's prepared me 2 JDs and job descriptions, and we hope to get those out soon. As I say, we only actually got the funding okayed last week, so we're now moving ahead with that at pace.
Well, and a follow-on question from that, because with respect to the insurance side of things, so the person who's going to do the insurance stuff, they will be providing kind of insurance advice. So I understand from other sources that sort of person would need to be like an insurance broker sort of person. Is that correct, or is it more of a?
From their experience, perhaps, but not necessarily from their role. I mean, it is complicated because you've not just got buildings insurance, you've got things like public liability insurance for the PCCs and anyone who uses the church. And we've been talking about that for a long time with the insurers. They say they found a way through. So it would be giving advice on that kind of thing. We're making sure that anyone who was founding a CBMP knew exactly what the consequences of that were, what they had to cover off, what they would need to see in a package. But we've been talking to Trinitas and Ecclesiasticals. One of the reasons this has been a bit Chinese whispery for quite some time. Those have been delicate conversations, and they've basically got to a level where I don't understand them anymore. So I said to them, what you need to do now is talk to the specialists that we're going to be employing, who can have that kind of detailed technical conversation with you, because it is very complex. There's no getting around it. The insurance part of it is very complex. And we don't want to have something where someone's doing something that we've funded, like a church buildings management partnership, not having the right advice and perhaps doing something that came back to bite them. So
it was a concern somebody had expressed to me about exactly that sort of thing, whether the advice was kind of like a financial advisor sort of thing, that sort of accreditation.
The advice you can give is very, very hedged round.
Right.
You have to be careful about what you kind of advice you give in this industry. Tom. can't hear you, Tom. You're still mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, can now. Or I could.
Hello, sorry.
Yeah.
Couple of questions, headset is going wrong. Around the contract aspect, I realised that initially maybe a lot of the works that will be done on the church will be basic maintenance rather than anything more specialist. But a couple of things. Who, in regards to the CIO being set up and everything, who takes responsibility for ensuring the contractors are competent in order to undertake the works? Is that taken out of the parish's hands through this agreement?
Yes,
or
yes,
does
it
the parish
is.
still act as the client in this respect?
No, the CBMP, the Church Buildings Management Partnership, or the trust, or whatever it calls itself when it registers itself as a CIO, would be responsible for that, because through the lease mechanism, you're taking over that responsibility. Yeah, so that liability would sit there. Not for repairs. If the parish does repairs, say it needs to get £250,000 to fix the roof, that's not part of the deal. That's, as I said, the church still remains under the control of the PCC. The things that the CBMP does, the CIO does, are only whatever is set out in the contract between the CBMP and the parish. So it wouldn't be taking on entire responsibility for the building. But repairs would be different. But if it was just part of a maintenance package, then that would be covered. So, for example, your typical contractor who's looking after who's doing a maintenance visit to a church might fix tiles. That's been a typical thing, to fix a slip tile while they're up there. That would be covered by that arrangement.
Right, that's fine. So anyone that comes as part of this will be covered. The checking to ensure that they're competent and undertaking their work in a safe manner will be undertaken by the CIO.
Yeah,
that's set up. Okay. And in regards to, I suppose, finding and guaranteeing contractors, and I'm not saying I'm concerned, I just have a general question about this. I mean, some of you might be on this call familiar, not obviously just for the Church of England, but the National Churches Trust set up their maintenance booker in that respect. And I know anecdotally aspects of that, they struggle to keep people, shall we say, in that respect. So that's kind of, do you have a bank already, or is it working on the fact that hopefully this will actually, it'll have a positive snowball effect, that people will want to come on board because this concept expands where it is in that respect?
Yeah, we've been talking to the NCT about maintenance booker, which now sits with 2x2. We're looking at whether it might be possible to actually adapt that as a booking system. I think the reason that maintenance booker has struggled slightly is not to do with the actual the way it's set up. It's what I alluded to before. Contractors don't have a big enough body of work to make it attractive, so they don't stick with it. In this case, this is one of the advantages of a CBMP model. If a CBMP gets enough churches, if in a diocese it's got 3-figure churches, that's a body of work big enough for a contractor to still be interested. I mean, one of the examples is St Edmundsbury in Ipswich, where we did our pilot project a couple of years ago. There had been a well worked out maintenance scheme there called Helix, and the company that ran it eventually just pulled the plug on it because they didn't have enough work to actually, because people drift away, as I said before, they didn't have enough work to justify them continuing to do it. But they actually offered the maintenance work. They were very good, as I understand it, and they offered it at a very decent price in the realm that one could save from the insurance, from saving something on the insurance. So yes, the idea is that there will be a standard booking system, whether it's maintenance booker or a version of maintenance booker. We're working on that. And the maintenance expert that we will be employing will be responsible for setting up a national sort of booking system and a national contract that individual CBMPs will be able to use or tweak. So that's what they'll be doing for people. So we think that by doing that, we can cut out a lot of the administration of having to set up lots of mini schemes, because we can have an off-the-shelf contractual arrangement and an off-the-shelf booking arrangement that you can all sign up to. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that answers that question. Hopefully my last one. This has obviously got funding for the moment, and funding eventually runs out. We're all aware of that. I'm just interested to know what the model is going forward. Is it a percentage that's taken off the contractor, or is it an increased percentage as a handling fee off the parish in order to keep this kind of model going forward and having the ability, I suppose, to pay for all of the background work that needs to be undertaken?
Yeah, I mean, the parish has to pay. This is not a freebie. It's never been a freebie. The parish has to pay a set amount to be agreed with the CBMP for these services.
And so it will be off that set amount that the CBMP will then take a percentage in order to continue to function.
To continue its function, yeah. So, and again, that will depend on what each diocese wants to put into it. If it's nothing, then it's going to be tight. If they want to put some money into it, particularly in the early years, it will be less tight. Very few things are totally cost neutral. We all know that there are extra costs that you've not thought of. This is a trial. If we're successful with this, I would hope that no one can promise anything, of course, but that we could apply for further funding going forward from the centre that could support this. I think we are thinking at the moment that we want to have, we're going to be asking for funding for these two specialists for quite a while going forward to support this concept. So we hope that if we can get as many dioceses signing up to it as showed interest at the end of last year, we could be onto something here that would attract further support. But the basics of it are, that it's not like some trusts where they take everything off the church and it doesn't have to do anything anymore and the PCC can dissolve and go away. We would expect the church to be able to pay its way to support this economically in normal circumstances. But if things work well, they shouldn't be paying any more or not much more than they were before, for less. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Looking to see if there's any other hands. Or am I going to go away very lightly? I can't see you all. So I think if someone, there we are. Catherine.
I was just wondering, you're talking about maintenance and people quite often have to get grants for that sort of thing. Would the CIO be that legal entity? And if you were joined together with a group of churches, would, say, a wealthy church then impinge on a church that had less getting a grant?
Yeah, well, that's always a possibility. Individual churches have agency. The point is the CBMP is not taking the church away from them. In terms of maintenance, that would be a standard package, and that would obviously depend on how big the church is and factors such as, is it very high and do you need specialist equipment to get up there? So that's something to be worked out individually within the standard contract. There's nothing to stop a church buildings management partnership becoming much more proactive if it finds it's commercially viable, it's doing okay. The original idea was that one might partner up with other organizations who could help with things like fundraising, and I would partly expect that to work. What one wouldn't want is some churches having advantages over others within the church buildings management partnership. Clearly, you'd have to be scrupulously fair because it's not going to cost £500 to have the annual maintenance on what we would normally call a major church as opposed to a festival church. There would have to be some variation in what was charged there. But hopefully it will be less than it would normally be if you weren't booking it at scale, if that makes sense. So a church buildings management partnership can do anything you want beyond, if it agrees with the PCC, it can do certain things. If it can make agreements with outside bodies with the PCC's consent. And we did notice when we did St Edmundsbury and Ipswich, we actually had sort of great and good people as trustees. It wasn't just diocesan officers. It was possible to attract people who were quite active with churches in that area. And if you've got a CBMP that's formed of 3 or 4 dioceses, you maximize the number of people you might find who could be able to do that. And they may have energy to help parishes in other ways beyond the simple mechanics of insurance and maintenance. So that's a bit of a roundabout answer that I'm not sure really gets your question. Have you got a follow-up question to that, or is it something I've not answered?
No, I was just sort of thinking if you're applying to grants from external bodies, that's possible, is it?
Yes, and the Church Buildings Management Partnership could help them with that within its ability. You have to remember also that we're thinking of this as a package with the support officers, that we're going to be putting out funding for dioceses and other groups to apply for support officer roles. So we would see our 2 officers and the CBNP, where it's in place, working very closely with those new support officers. We're hoping to establish a national network of those. We will be creating, we hope, at least 20 posts, but we think it could be considerably more than that if some applicants provide match funding. So with those support officers around the country, together with the expert officers, together with the CBNPs, hopefully bringing in trustees who have good connections and can perhaps work with other bodies like the Churches Conservation Trust, there could be a good support mechanism there with all that put together.
Okay, thanks.
Can't at the moment see any more. Oh, is that a legacy hand, Catherine, or did you think of another question? I can't see any more yellow hands, so if someone just wants to speak up. I'm amazed. I expected to be asked about the intricacies of insurance, which I wasn't going to be able to answer.
Hi Joe, Keith here.
Hello, Keith.
I'm very happy to ask you about intricacies of insurance if you like.
Thank you.
What I was going to ask was, well, I will come back to insurance now you've prompted me, but out of all the different schemes that are operating in different dioceses, which are CIOs or trusts or whatever it is that have been set up, such as the Norwich model, is this similar to any of those, and how successful have those been? And what has been the main problems behind them?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. Single building trusts can be very successful. There are a number of trusts that have worked very well because they've managed to get enough people with have got the right skills. And there are a number of them that are doing very well. So individual trusts. There are other trusts that help with things like maintenance, and it's quite a patchwork. So this is not, as you know, in a void. There's been lots of examples of this. Friends trusts can sit alongside a PCC, etc. The one example we could point to, there's a couple of examples. One's as I mentioned before, the Norwich Diocesan Churches Trust. I don't know if anyone from Norwich is here to talk about how that's going. I think they've got about 20 churches within that. It's a slightly different model in that it leases the entire church except the porch or doorway or whatever, and takes pretty much all responsibility off the PCC. So how that's going, I don't know. But that is taking on more responsibility than the CBNP model is, which leaves the parish and PCC in control, assuming there is one. And in London, with the corporation churches, they've done a similar insurance deal, where I think because of the status of the corporation and its relationship with the churches, they were able to make a similar block deal for, I think is anyone from London here, they can put me right, but I think there's about 30 of them. So they did what we are suggesting here. They raised the excess and reduced the premium and only insured them for certain things. And have been able to save money that way, and again taking the stress off the local people who are looking after them. So we don't have any new ideas at the CBC. We steal other people's. I always say this. We see what's working in the dioceses and say that's a really good idea. Maybe tweak it a bit, adapt it for national consumption, and then we put it out there with initiatives like this for people to use if they see fit. Think it's interesting. So I alluded to insurance there already, Keith. Do you have any follow-up questions on insurance?
Sorry. Yeah, has any thought been given to having, rather than insuring separate churches still under a block policy, of increasing the indemnity insured rather than the number of buildings included in it? So you're insured up to £70 million worth of indemnity, which would give you, say, 3 or 4 total losses in a year. Which will never happen, but it doesn't matter how many buildings you actually have in that portfolio. Obviously there are different risks with different buildings.
You're talking about talk about self-insurance policy there, really, aren't you? You know, there are the insurers actually have presented us with a smorgasbord of different models that we could use, and some of them are quite radical. And again, I said to them, hold your horses until we've got someone who really knows what they're talking about to talk to you about this. So there's a captive insurance model. There's what we started off with a mutual model. And there's self-insurance, which the CCT did. I'm not sure they still do it, but they did it for a long time, where basically, you know, if one of their churches burns down, you know, the money would come from the central pot, but they're not insured individually. There are a number of ways to do this. And although our insurance expert, I've just given you the most basic one, which is the traditional method, if you like. So, you know, we'd have a block for individual churches block field individual churches could join. But what you're describing is one of the more radical models, and is possible. And a CBMP has agency to do any of those things that it wishes to do, because the CBMP can make deals with the insurers. And I'm sure that our yet to be appointed expert would be happy to have those conversations with you within the boundaries of what one can do with this sort of advice.
Cheers, Joe.
Yeah. Anybody else? Please speak up, and I might not be able to see you if you've got a question. Alison, hello, Alison, there you are.
Hello there, nice to see you, and thank you for all of that. I guess it's a timing question from me, Joe. As you're aware, we're in Worcester and we have been kind of trying to prepare the ground for this, and the next stage that we're going into for doing that is actually getting a working party of parish folk together to start to actually say, well, how will this work on the ground? What are your questions? How do we put this way together in a way that's attractive to churches? And I think once you get into the reality, churches start to say, oh, this feels a bit new and squeaky. Maybe we'll just carry on like we are. So I think we need to be doing that work of preparing that ground. In terms of the timing for the insurance conversation, what's the best way forward as we continue to start to find our contractors, start to find our churches, and start to find our questions? At what point should we bring the insurance conversation in?
Well, I think most people here haven't set one up yet, so they've got a good 45 days at least, even if they put them in tomorrow. You've already done it, and I've been naughty enough to send around your successful template to everybody with instant interest, and we put that on the website eventually with your agreement, obviously anonymized. Yes, we've, as I say, Grace, who's on this call, has got job descriptions drawn up. I need to have a look at them, and we need to get those adverts out. And we were hoping, we told the insurers that we might have someone in place by the end of February. That we'll see if that's ambitious, but that would be really good if we could do that. And we'd want them to be cutting their teeth straight away on real world issues. So you're at the head of the queue, Alison, because you're already there with a CBMP. And it would be good to start teasing out some of the practical issues. And Keith, the previous questions brought up some of the more radical ideas that there are out there. So how you could do this, which makes it quite exciting, actually, that there are these possibilities of doing things in slightly different ways. So that's the sort of timeline we're working to, but we are going to be putting out, I think it's a total of, well, over the next months, something in the region 25 jobs will be advertised, and there's a whole swathe of them for net zero as well. So we're just hoping there's enough people out there who have the skills. It'd be even better if we could find somebody internally, but only Grace would probably know whether there's any likelihood of that. There are people out in the dioceses who have really a lot of experience with insurance, certainly far more knowledge and experience than I have. So we're hoping that some of those people might be, interested in a role like this, which is for 3 years in the first place. But I think if this is successful, will hopefully become permanent roles. Yeah.
Thank you.
Who else is putting their hands up? Jill, we've had conversations about this.
Hi, Joe. Nice to see you. You mentioned Eds and Ips did a pilot across the deanery, and you said, maybe sort of hinted at the fact that it was quite small scale, and that was one of the reasons it failed. Was there anything else that it would be helpful to know about, either positives or negatives of doing it at that scale as opposed to doing it across the diocese?
Yeah, I think as a pilot, sort of shows that there would be a group of people you could talk to, and there was a couple of incumbents one could talk to who were very enthusiastic about it. But that is the wrong approach. I think to do it in one deanery just doesn't get you the scale that you need. So it's actually better to do it across the whole diocese, because what we're aiming for is to get 100% of the churches into the scheme there, which may well take a long time if that's your approach. It might be better to ask all the churches who's in, most dioceses will have a feel for which churches are in the sort of situation where they'd be receptive or desperate for an offer like this. When we were doing the work, a lot of people said, why wouldn't anyone join this? It's kind of a no-brainer. But I think, as was mentioned before by Alison, Church of England people are naturally rather worried and scared by new things, especially if they feel they're in any way, being used as lab rats or on something that's experimental. So we're not thinking that, if say all the dioceses in England pressed the button and spent the next 45 days getting their CIOs set up, that we would then get 16,000 churches, signed up to this. We wouldn't. It's going to be incremental. It's going to be a few at the beginning. So I think it's quite clear that given that, the CBMP, is possibly not going to be totally self-financing at the beginning, because you're going to have few churches, but you're nevertheless going to have to start setting up those contracts with maintenance companies, and it's got to be interesting for them. So you might start with, 50 and work up from that. So one's going to have a bit of patience and faith probably to build it up. But I think, yes, going at a deanery model, which was just practical, because we had the data on a certain number of churches. So we looked at what they were paying in insurance. We looked at how many were on the buildings at risk register. We looked at how many had bats. We looked at how many, had other problems, how many had not done their QI in the last 5 years, and all those sorts of things. It was actually a really interesting and worthwhile exercise to go through. But that's not the way you would launch it. We've done that pilot. The reason it failed was COVID, actually. It meant that we couldn't actually go and talk to any of those people to explain what it was all about. So those particular lab rats never got approached because just as we were launching it, COVID, the lockdown phase of COVID happened. But never stopped working away at it. And we felt really that COVID had given impetus to it, that this was likely to have put a lot more churches in a situation where they might be receptive to this sort of thing, rather than just saying, we're fine, we can carry on, as we have done for hundreds of years.
Thank you.
Kate, you've got another question? Oh, sorry, there's someone else. Kate, I'll put you on hold because Simon is asking a question I see now.
I wondered whether in those places that have already done some of this, they struggled to find kind of competent, properly qualified contractors to do the maintenance work, particularly in the more rural and remote areas. We know that currently churches in the Diocese of Truro, so that's Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, struggle with that. And I wonder whether that was a factor at all, and if so, what mitigations were put in place, and whether there was consideration given to actually setting up a kind of an in-house capacity to do that. In other words, employing maintenance guys to do that directly.
Yeah, it's a possibility. If you've got the income coming in, to get enough churches involved, you could book them. Well, you would book them yourself as a CBMP rather than leaving it to the parishes. But the capacity you're talking about is a big issue. And it goes back to the problem I talked about before, which is that there simply wasn't enough scale for it to be worthwhile, people specializing in doing that. In London, I don't think they have, I don't know if there's anyone from London on this call, they actually pay for themselves. I think they're the only diocese who does that. The diocese pays for the maintenance of the buildings, and that is a successful scheme, unsurprisingly. And because they can offer, because it's London, I guess, it's quite compact, and they have the scale. They've been able to, I think, find good people who can do this work. But capacity has been the death of every maintenance scheme so far. So finding the right people to do the work has been difficult. But again, that's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. If you don't have enough work to interest them and to make that, and to make that cut price, maintenance scheme worthwhile for them, then that capacity will never exist. So one has to start somewhere. There's usually some people around who can do it, but if you can say to them, it's not just that one church at the tip of the Lizard and another church near St. Germans, can you do those two for us? They may well say that's not worth our while. But if you can string together a number of 20 or 30 in between, maybe it becomes worth their while. So that's the hope. So we've been suggesting, for the example for Truro, we asked the Diocesan Secretary of Truro who they would partner with, and they said, well, it's going to be Exeter or Massachusetts, or possibly both, because there's not much choice when you're Truro diocese. But actually teaming up with another diocese may make it again more interesting. So we really are keen. We would be encouraging dioceses to join up with their neighbours to do this, because that will increase the pot of churches that there is to work on, that would make it more attractive for the contractors that are there, or for somebody to set themselves up to do that. But I completely acknowledge that this is a risk to a project, because maintenance has not been carried out on many of our churches. So that means there's no one to do it.
Well, I am the diocesan secretary from the Diocese of Truro, and I think it was Connecticut we were talking to.
That's it, Connecticut, not Massachusetts.
I can see Graham from my less fortunate neighbour to the east is on the call, and so we will have further conversations with them. But thanks.
Yeah. Kate, you had your hand up.
I've got a complicated insurance question for you, Joe.
Oh no.
So who is covering the insurance for kind of employment, safe long-term impact of safeguarding issues, all that sort of stuff?
The advantage, as is always said, of these packages that one can buy is that pretty much everything is in there. So the PCC takes that insurance out and it covers them with those various liabilities, safeguarding and all the rest of it.
Oh, okay, so the PCC still have to have their own insurance for...
Well, that's the complication.
Yes.
But we've been told that there is both big insurance companies think they can find a way around it.
Okay.
Because we don't want to have a lot of little policies, because that will just become very, very complicated. And so you want to bring it together in one policy, but there is a question of who's liable having the insurance. So there are complications there. And I knew I was going to be asked this, but the answer is that it's complicated, but doable. And it's one of the things that our expert insurance will be working with the insurers on. They have both assured us that there is a deal to be done. There is a package that can be brought together, but you have to be careful of those specific liabilities and who's the person who's signing who's the person who's ultimately responsible, if you like. So I think I did say before, there is this difference between bricks and mortar, the buildings insurance, and the insurance of the people and what they do within that shell. And that's been something that's, I wouldn't say it's held us back, but we've been talking about that for quite a long time. And it is the key to unlocking this, really. But we are assured it's possible.
Right, thank you.
Jill, back to you.
I've just been thinking about the capacity and finding contractors. I know every diocese is structured differently, but it's just occurred to me that we're talking an awful lot about church buildings, but we're not talking about vicarages. And we have a property team that essentially has a little back book of contractors that they use on their vicarages. Has there been, do any dioceses have good relationships with their property team and work with them on securing contractors, and has that been part of the conversation at national level as well?
It has. Several dioceses I've talked to have suggested that they already have these teams looking after other properties, and that they think that they could expand them. There is an issue whether they're as used to working with historic buildings, but that is certainly a model to scale up the deals that one has already. Looking after, as you say, vicarages and other buildings within the diocese. So if there is a mature contract with such people that are theory. There's no reason why that simply couldn't be expanded and indeed possibly bring down the rates for the other work that they're doing. We have had conversations with the Churches Conservation Trust about this, I should add, and we wanted to have them on board, and they did present us at one point with a proposal for them to provide the this service, the maintenance service. At the moment, we haven't been able to agree. I think they went away to say that they would look for some funding to support that. I don't know if there's anyone from the CCT on this call, but those conversations are still open. So there may be many ways to provide this, you know, working with other partners perhaps who have similar needs outside the church for work on their properties, depending where you are in the country and who those people might be. So we've certainly kept those lines open. As I say, we've been talking to CCT, NCT, Friends of Friendless, other partners, because if you were able to, you know, obviously they have far less buildings than the Church of England has, or even other denominations, it might be possible to build up capacity that way. Yeah. But it's a real issue, and that lack of capacity in the sector is an issue. But we would like to make the argument to government that we're doing our bit, and to HE, who I think are on the call, that we're going to try and do our bit to build up skills and qualifications, and that goes also for the support officer roles, where we think there's a role for apprenticeships in recruiting to those roles. Catherine.
Sorry, it's all the same people again. I was just wondering what the relationship between the trustees and the PCC is. Do you have PCC members as trustees as well, or is it something that's more informal and the CIO is completely separate?
Well, there has to be a contractual relationship between the CNBP, between the CIO and the PCC, clearly as legal bodies, legally constituted bodies, the contractual relationship there. But your trustees could be whoever they want, whoever you could find. So there's no reason why someone who was on a PCC couldn't be a trustee of the CBNP, but it would be likely that they would not be there to represent the interests of their particular church, because that would be a conflict of interests. But there's no reason why you couldn't source your trustees wherever you want. Previous sort of trust type arrangements have often used officers from the diocese. You know, so you'd have the archdeacons and the DAC secretary would be the secretary to it and that kind of thing. Alison is nodding. that is obviously an easy and automatic way to do it, because you've got a captive audience. You've got people who are willing to sign legal documents and are covered by the diocese's liability and that kind of thing. So that's attractive, but yes, it would be good to get as many interested, enthusiastic and knowledgeable people as you can as trustees of your CBNP. But I'm fully aware that's going to be different in every diocese. It probably looks slightly different everywhere you are. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So I think, you know, this is a very flexible model. If you cut to the chase, it's just forming a trust that can, through a lease mechanism, perform certain things on behalf of PCCs. That's what it comes down to. And I am aware from conversations around the country that many dioceses want to do this in slightly different ways, and they are in different situations, rural, urban. Some may have contractors in place, some may have never seen a contractor for many months or for many miles. But we'll try and support you all in your individual situations as much as we can. If you go down this road, there will be support for you. Have I stumped you all now? Are there no more questions? So we can all get off for a cup of tea. So if there are no more questions, what I would say is reiterate what I said at the beginning, although this has been, as I say, a bit secretive because of the complex conversations we've had to have with a number of organizations and people. We are now about to go public on this. So a lot of the templates that have been circulated before will go online. We'll have a proper website, and we'll start to build up the relationships when we've got the officers in post. But in the meantime, you'll have to make do with me. So if you've got any questions on any of this, I'm here. And as I say, although I'm not an expert in many of these areas, I'll try and give you any support and advice I can until we've got the two officers in place. But there's absolutely nothing to stop you, and it's free, starting to set up your CIO, so you have it in place. If you did set it up, it wouldn't commit you to anything. You could close it down the next week. So I would encourage anyone, while you're waiting or while you're thinking about this, to consider whether it's a good idea to start setting up your CIO to get those 45 days out of the way. And if you're deciding to do that, then please get in touch with me and we'll get whatever support and advice we can to you. And we'll look out for the internal press release in the coming days about this whole package, and all the posts we'll be creating, and the minor repairs fund and all the other things that you're about to hear about. So we are actually handing out some money as well as posts, but we haven't quite worked out how we're going to do that yet. But yeah, there we are. Thank you.
Bye.
There's no more questions. I'll take my leave. Bye-bye.